The cafe buzzed with the morning rush, its hum of espresso machines and lively chatter serving as a stark contrast to the numbness Alice felt. The world outside moved as usual, yet hers had stood still since the day David passed. Her heart ached with a heaviness that no words could soothe. The warmth of her young daughter Lily's hand, however, kept her grounded, reminding her daily that she still had something precious to live for. But it wasn't easy. Each day was a struggle, an endless routine of working two jobs just to keep afloat. After her morning shift at the cafe, Alice would rush home to care for her mother, Mary, whose health had sharply declined. Mary had always been her rock, but now, confined to her bed, she was fragile, her once vibrant spirit fading. Between her two jobs, caring for Mary and making sure Lily didn't feel neglected, Alice often found herself on the verge of collapse. That particular morning at the cafe felt no different. Alice moved mechanically, refilling cups, wiping down tables, smiling at customers without really seeing them, until she noticed Margaret. Margaret was an elderly woman who came to the cafe regularly, always alone, always quiet. She had a warm, dignified presence, and Alice had often wondered what her story was. That day, Margaret caught Alice's eye and motioned her over. "I see you're working hard as always," Margaret said kindly as Alice refilled her cup. Alice offered a polite smile, though exhaustion clung to her every word. "Yes, it's been a busy time." Margaret paused, her eyes soft with a quiet understanding. "I know what it's like," she said gently. "I've been where you are now, more years ago than I care to remember." She reached in her bag and pulled out a small note, slipping it into Alice's hand. "When you have time, come and visit me. I think we could talk." Alice blinked, momentarily caught off guard. She glanced at the note, just an address and a simple sentence. "Come by when you have time." Margaret smiled once more and quietly left the cafe, leaving Alice staring at the note in her hand. It wasn't until hours later, after the end of her shift, that she stuffed it into her bag. She had too much on her mind to think about visiting anyone. Days passed in the usual blur, and Alice quickly forgot about Margaret's note. Then came the night when Lily fell ill. It started with a small fever, but within hours it had escalated into something serious. Alice spent that night by her daughter's bedside, her own heart pounding in fear as the doctors worked to stabilize Lily. She couldn't afford to lose Lily, not after losing David. She couldn't bear the thought. In those harrowing hours, Alice found a sliver of unexpected comfort in Claire, a friend from her second job, who rushed to the hospital with food and support. Claire was always there when Alice needed someone, even when Alice was too proud to ask for help. The two women shared quiet moments in the hospital waiting room, Alice too tired to speak much, Claire knowing better than to press her. In the midst of the crisis, Alice met Tom. He had been visiting his brother, who was also admitted that night. As they sat together in the waiting area, he offered a kind smile, noticing the strain on Alice's face. "You look like you could use a break," he said gently, handing her a cup of coffee. She accepted it with a grateful nod, her mind too occupied with worry to think about much else. Yet somehow, talking to Tom, even about small things like the weather or the hospital food, lifted some of the weight off her shoulders. In that moment, Alice realized how lonely she had felt, despite being surrounded by people. Thankfully, Lily's condition improved after a few days, though Alice left the hospital more exhausted than ever. But amidst the chaos, something shifted in her. Margaret's note resurfaced in her memory, and after taking a deep breath, she decided to finally visit the elderly woman. Alice knocked on the door of Margaret's modest home, feeling a strange mixture of hesitation and hope. When the door opened, Margaret's kind eyes welcomed her, as if she had been expecting Alice all along. "Come in, dear," Margaret said warmly, gesturing toward a cozy sitting room where a pot of tea was already brewing. Alice sat down, feeling out of place, yet somehow comforted by the familiar scent of herbal tea and the soft atmosphere. As they sipped their tea, Margaret shared her story, how she had once lost her husband during the war and had to raise her children alone. It was a story filled with pain, perseverance, and eventually success. "I didn't have much," Margaret said, her voice calm, "but I learned how to turn what little I had into something more. It wasn't easy, but I managed." She paused, looking deeply into Alice's eyes. "And I think you can too. I want to help you, Alice. Not just with advice, but with real opportunities." Alice stared at her, unsure of how to respond. Margaret's offer was generous, almost too generous. Alice had never been the kind of person to rely on others, especially after David's death. She had always prided herself on her ability to manage alone, to keep pushing through for Lily's sake. But in that moment, something inside her shifted. Maybe, just maybe, accepting help wasn't a sign of weakness. Maybe it was the first step toward finding herself again. And so, for the first time in a long while, Alice decided to take a chance. The early morning light filtered through the thin curtains in Alice's small kitchen as she prepared breakfast. The clatter of plates, the smell of coffee, and the sound of Lily's cheerful chatter should have brought a sense of normalcy, but Alice's mind was elsewhere. Margaret's words still lingered, a small flame of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. After weeks of surviving on autopilot, something inside her had sparked to life. Maybe it was time to stop just existing and start trying again. "Mama, can we go to the park after school today?" Lily's voice interrupted Alice's thoughts, her bright eyes wide with excitement. Alice smiled, ruffling her daughter's hair. "Maybe, sweetheart, if I can finish everything with work and visit Grandma." Lily's expression faltered slightly. Is Grandma going to get better? The question hung heavy in the air. Mary's health had been declining faster lately, and Alice found it harder each day to reassure Lily while keeping her own fears at bay. She looked down at her coffee cup, her fingers gripping it tighter than necessary. "She's resting, honey, but we're doing everything we can to make her comfortable," Alice said softly, her voice catching. "And you know, Grandma loves having you visit. It makes her so happy." Lily nodded, her face clouded with quiet worry. She didn't press the matter, but Alice could see the sadness in her daughter's eyes. It mirrored her own. Later that day, after dropping Lily off at school, Alice's thoughts returned to Margaret's offer. She still couldn't quite believe the elderly woman had offered her so much help. Alice had never been the type to accept charity. Pride had always kept her from asking for more than she could earn. But Margaret hadn't made her feel like she was taking advantage. Instead, she had offered something deeper, a connection, a sense that they were kindred spirits who had both weathered storms. When her shift at the cafe ended, Alice hesitated before leaving. Normally, she would rush straight home to her mother, but something pulled her in a different direction. Margaret's house was close, and Alice felt a strange urgency to visit again, to hear more of her story, and maybe to believe in the possibility of something better for herself and Lily. By the time she reached Margaret's front door, Alice's heart was racing. This time, she knocked without hesitation. "Ah, Alice." Margaret greeted her with a warm smile, ushering her in. "I hope you might stop by again." "Come in, come in." The familiar coziness of Margaret's sitting room welcomed Alice once more. They sat at the small table, tea already set. As the steam from the cup curled into the air, Alice felt a little of the day's weight lift from her shoulders. "I wanted to thank you again, Margaret, for the other day." "You didn't have to do that," Alice began, her voice soft but sincere. Margaret waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, nonsense, my dear. It's no trouble at all. I've seen you. How hard you work. How much you carry on your own. You remind me of myself once upon a time." She paused, her eyes softening. "I know what it feels like to think the world is on your shoulders. But trust me, you don't have to carry it all alone." Alice looked down, fidgeting with her teacup. "It's hard to let go of things, especially when it feels like everything is already slipping out of my control." Margaret nodded. "I understand. But sometimes, letting go isn't the same as giving up. It's just about making room for something new." They talked for a while longer, Margaret sharing more stories of her struggles, of how she had lost her husband but eventually built a life for herself and her children. She spoke with a calm confidence that made Alice believe that, perhaps, the life she had now wasn't the only one she was destined for. Before Alice left, Margaret gave her something more than just words. "There's someone I want you to meet," she said, handing Alice a business card. "A friend of mine in the marketing industry. She's always looking for sharp minds, and I think you'd do well there." Alice looked at the card, her heart pounding again. A marketing department? Her thoughts whirled with self-doubt. Could she really step out of the routine she had built, the only thing that had kept her afloat? I don't know if I'm ready for something like this," Alice admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Margaret leaned in, her eyes kind but firm. "You are, and you deserve more than just surviving, Alice. You have so much to offer, even if you don't see it yet." Alice clutched the card as she left, unsure of what her next step should be, but knowing she had to make one. That evening, Alice returned home to find her mother in a rare moment of clarity. Mary sat up in bed, her frail figure propped against the pillows, and smiled weakly as Alice entered the room. "How was your day, sweetheart?" Mary's voice was soft but steady. Alice sat on the edge of the bed, taking her mother's hand. "Busy as usual," she said, trying to smile. "Lily's doing well, though. She misses you." Mary's eyes flickered with sadness, but she nodded. "I miss her too." There was a pause before Mary squeezed Alice's hand a little tighter. "You've always been so strong, Alice. But I want you to know it's okay to lean on others. It's okay to ask for help." Alice swallowed hard. Her mother's words echoed Margaret's, stirring something deep inside her. She hadn't realized how much she had been holding in, how much she had been trying to be everything for everyone, without allowing herself a moment to breathe. That night, after Lily was tucked into bed, Alice sat at the kitchen table, staring at the business card Margaret had given her. She didn't know what the future held, and part of her was terrified to take any leap at all. But she thought about her mother's fading strength, about Lily's questions, and about Margaret's unwavering belief that she could do more than just survive. With trembling fingers, Alice dialed the number on the card. A new chapter was about to begin, and though fear tugged at the edges of her mind, for the first time in a long while, Alice felt a spark of hope. The phone call to Margaret's contact had gone better than Alice expected. After a brief conversation with Amanda, the head of a marketing department for a local company, Alice was invited for an interview. The thought of stepping into something so new terrified her, but the possibility of a fresh start was too tempting to ignore. And so, the following Monday, Alice found herself standing outside a sleek office building, nerves buzzing in her chest. She clutched her handbag tightly, as though it could somehow steady the whirlwind inside her. Stepping into the brightly lit office, Alice felt out of place in her simple blouse and skirt. Everyone around her seemed so polished, so sure of themselves. She swallowed her anxiety, reminding herself of why she was there, not just for herself, but for Lily, for a chance at a better life. The receptionist gave her a warm smile and guided her to Amanda's office. Amanda was a striking woman in her 40s, with sharp eyes and a commanding presence. As soon as Alice sat down, she felt the pressure of high expectations. Amanda wasted no time in describing the role, outlining the demands and challenges. "We move fast here," Amanda said, her tone brisk but not unkind. "You'll need to be adaptable, but if you can keep up, there's room for growth." Alice nodded, trying to seem confident, though her heart was pounding. "I'm willing to learn," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of hard work." Amanda's eyes softened just slightly as she looked over Alice's resume. "Margaret speaks highly of you, and that counts for a lot in my book. Let's give it a try. We'll start with a probation period. I expect you to hit the ground running." And just like that, Alice had a new job. The first few weeks were grueling. Alice had thought her cafe job was hard, but this was a different kind of pressure. Marketing strategies, client presentations, team collaborations. It was a world she had no experience in. Every day felt like a test, and every small mistake weighed heavily on her. Amanda, true to her reputation, was demanding. There were moments when Alice felt completely out of her depth, and self-doubt crept in like a shadow. But there were also moments of triumph, small victories like successfully completing a client report or contributing a new idea in a meeting. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her going. At home, things were growing more complicated. Mary's health continued to decline, and Lily, perceptive as ever, started asking more difficult questions. "Why doesn't Grandma talk much anymore?" Lily asked one evening as Alice was helping her with her homework. Alice hesitated, her chest tightening with grief. "Grandma's very tired, sweetheart, but she loves you so much." Lily looked down, her pencil still in her hand. "I miss her and Daddy too," she whispered. Those words cut deeper than any of the challenges Alice faced at work. She knelt beside Lily and pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I know, baby. I miss them too." That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, Alice sat alone at the kitchen table, her heart heavy. The house felt quieter than usual, the air thick with memories. She missed David every day, but seeing Lily carry that weight at such a young age broke her heart. She needed to be strong for her daughter, but some nights the grief felt unbearable. And then there was her mother. Mary's once vibrant spirit had all but faded. She rarely spoke now, and when she did, it was usually in fragmented sentences, memories tangled with the present. Alice knew that soon she would have to make the hardest decision of her life, whether to move her mother into palliative care. The thought tore her apart, but deep down, she knew it was inevitable. Mary needed more care than Alice could provide on her own. One evening, about a month into her new job, Amanda called Alice into her office. "We have a big client coming in next week," Amanda said, looking at Alice with an intensity that made her heart race. "This is a chance to prove yourself. I want you to work on the marketing strategy." Alice's stomach flipped. She hadn't been expecting such a big responsibility so soon. "Me?" she asked, her voice betraying her surprise. Amanda leaned back in her chair, studying Alice carefully. "Yes, you. I see potential in you, Alice, but you need to step up. This is your opportunity." Alice nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "I'll do my best." As she left Amanda's office, a mix of fear and excitement coursed through her veins. This was the chance she had been waiting for, but the stakes were high. Failure wasn't an option. Not if she wanted to keep this job. Not if she wanted to build a better future for Lily. She threw herself into the project, working late into the night after Lily had gone to bed, her mind buzzing with ideas. At work, she enlisted the help of James, one of the more experienced members of the team. He was kind and patient, always willing to offer advice without making Alice feel incompetent. But not everyone was so supportive. Michael, another colleague, had been openly competitive from the start. He didn't hide his skepticism of Alice's abilities, and she often overheard him making snide remarks to others in the office. "She's not cut out for this," she once heard him say to a coworker. "Margaret's charity case isn't going to last long." Alice pretended not to hear, but the words stung. She had worked hard to get here, and she wasn't going to let someone like Michael undermine her. Still, his presence added pressure to an already stressful situation. The following week, as the presentation to the client loomed, Alice found herself on edge. She had spent hours perfecting the strategy, but doubt gnawed at her. What if she missed something? What if she failed? The night before the meeting, she stayed late at the office, reviewing everything one last time. James had offered to help, and together they went over the details, making sure every piece was flawless. It was well past midnight by the time Alice got home, utterly exhausted. As she tiptoed into Lily's room to check on her, she felt a wave of guilt. She had been so wrapped up in work, in caring for her mother, that she feared she was losing touch with her daughter. The look in Lily's eyes earlier that week, when she had asked about her father, haunted Alice. She didn't want her little girl to grow up feeling like her mother was absent, even if she was physically there. But tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow was important, and after it was over, she'd have more time to focus on Lily. At least she hoped so. The day of the presentation arrived, and Alice could barely eat breakfast, her nerves a tangled mess. She walked into the office with her shoulders tense, every step feeling heavier than the last. When the client finally arrived, the room buzzed with anticipation. Amanda sat at the head of the table, poised and confident. Alice took her place beside her, her notes neatly arranged, her heart racing. As she began her presentation, she stumbled at first, the weight of everyone's eyes on her. But then something shifted. The more she spoke, the more she found her rhythm. The strategy she had worked on so tirelessly began to flow from her with a confidence she hadn't known she possessed. When she finished, there was a moment of silence, and Alice held her breath, waiting. Then Amanda smiled, a small but genuine smile, and nodded. "Well done, Alice." Alice exhaled, the tension in her shoulders melting away. She had done it. She had actually done it. But as she left the office that evening, a strange unease settled in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something bigger than just her job. And though she didn't know what lay ahead, for the first time in a long while, Alice felt like she was finally ready to face it. The morning after Alice's successful presentation, she woke with a strange mixture of pride and dread. The project had been a major turning point in her career, and she could feel Amanda's shift in attitude toward her. There was acknowledgement now, a quiet respect that hadn't been there before. But the challenges in her personal life hadn't eased, and those burdens still weighed heavily. At home, Mary's condition had deteriorated sharply over the past few days. Alice noticed her mother slipping in and out of consciousness more often, her once strong hands now fragile and cold to the touch. It was clear that her mother needed more care than Alice could give, even with the help of part-time nurses. One evening, as Alice sat beside Mary's bed, gently brushing her hair, she thought about the looming decision she had been avoiding. The idea of moving her mother into palliative care felt like an unbearable betrayal, as though she was giving up on the woman who had always been her pillar of strength. "I don't know what to do, Mom," Alice whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm trying so hard to be there for you and Lily, but I feel like I'm failing both of you." Mary's eyes fluttered open for a moment, a brief flicker of awareness passing through her gaze. She tried to speak, but the words were muddled, lost in the fog of her illness. Alice leaned in closer, holding her mother's hand, willing her to say something, anything, that might guide her. But no words came. That night, as Alice sat alone at the kitchen table, her thoughts swirling, she felt utterly lost. She knew the right decision. Palliative care was what Mary needed now. But the guilt gnawed at her. She didn't want to feel like she was abandoning her mother, the woman who had raised her with such love and sacrifice. Lily, who had been drawing quietly at the table, looked up and studied her mother's face. Alice hadn't realized her daughter had been watching her so closely. "Mama," Lily's voice was soft but steady. "Are you sad because of Grandma?" Alice nodded, her heart heavy. "Yes, sweetheart. Grandma isn't doing very well, and it's really hard for me right now." Lily's eyes shone with quiet understanding far beyond her years. "It's okay to be sad, Mama. I miss Grandma too." She paused, biting her lip. "But I miss Daddy more." Those last words hit Alice like a punch to the chest. She had been so focused on holding everything together that she hadn't fully realized how deeply Lily's grief still ran. Alice pulled her daughter into her arms, holding her tightly. "I know, baby. I miss him every day too," Alice whispered into Lily's hair. "I wish he were here." Lily nestled into her mother's embrace, her small hands clutching Alice's sweater. "Why'd he have to go, Mama? Why isn't he coming back?" Alice felt her throat tighten as she searched for the right words. "I don't know why, Lily. I wish I could tell you. But we have each other, and we're going to get through this together, okay?" Lily nodded, though her eyes still glistened with unshed tears. Alice kissed the top of her head and held her daughter close, vowing silently to be stronger for her, to find a way through this overwhelming sea of grief and responsibility. The following week was a blur of hospital visits, work, and trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for Lily. Alice could hardly believe how quickly life had spiraled into this state of perpetual exhaustion. But amid all the chaos, there was one constant source of support: Tom. She had run into him again at the hospital while visiting Mary, and their brief conversations had turned into regular chats. He often found her in the waiting room, bringing her coffee or just sitting with her in comfortable silence. Tom never pried, never pressed her to talk about her feelings. He simply showed up, offering his quiet presence in the moments she needed it most. One evening, after another long day at work, Alice returned home to find Tom waiting on her front porch. He had texted earlier, offering to bring dinner, but she hadn't expected him to go through with it. "I thought you could use something more than leftovers tonight," Tom said with a gentle smile, holding up a bag of takeout. Alice blinked, momentarily stunned by the kindness. She hadn't realized just how much she needed this. Someone to see her, to take a bit of the weight off her shoulders. "Tom, you didn't have to," she said, though her stomach growled at the sight of the food. "I know, but I wanted to." They sat at the kitchen table, Lily already asleep upstairs, and shared a quiet meal. As they ate, Alice found herself opening up to Tom in a way she hadn't expected. She told him about her struggles at work, about Michael's attempts to undermine her, about the guilt that consumed her when she thought about her mother. "I feel like I'm stretched so thin," Alice admitted, her voice low. "Like I'm trying to hold everything together, but I'm just waiting for it all to fall apart." Tom listened, his expression kind but thoughtful. "Alice, I don't think you realize how strong you are. You're carrying so much on your own, and anyone would feel overwhelmed. But you're still here doing it. That takes strength." Alice looked down at her hands, her throat tightening with emotion. No one had said that to her before, not in the way that Tom did. His words didn't feel like empty comfort. They felt real, genuine. "I don't feel strong," she whispered. Tom reached across the table, placing his hand gently over hers. "Maybe not right now, but I think you're stronger than you know." They sat like that for a moment, the silence between them soft and warm. Alice felt the tension in her shoulders begin to ease, if only a little. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel quite so alone. A few days later, Alice made the decision. She called the palliative care center and arranged for her mother to be moved there by the end of the week. The day it happened, Alice felt numb as she signed the papers and watched the nurses gently take her mother away. The house felt impossibly empty without Mary there, and Alice spent that evening walking from room to room, memories of her mother's laughter and love filling every corner. But the hardest moment came when Lily found her sitting in Mary's room, staring at the empty bed. "Is Grandma gone?" Lily asked, her voice quiet. Alice nodded, unable to speak for a moment. "She's gone to a place where they can take better care of her." Lily climbed into her lap, curling into her mother's arms. "Will we still see her?" Alice kissed the top of her daughter's head, holding her tightly. "Yes, sweetie. We'll visit her, and we'll always remember how much she loved us." That night, after putting Lily to bed, Alice sat alone in the quiet house, the weight of everything pressing down on her. She thought about Margaret, about the job that was giving her a new sense of purpose, and about Tom, who had become a steady presence in her life. There was no escaping the sadness, the grief, or the uncertainty that still lingered. But for the first time in a long time, Alice felt like maybe, just maybe, she could see a way forward. She had survived so much already, and though there were still battles ahead, Alice was starting to believe that she wouldn't have to face them all on her own. The day Mary passed was quiet, almost peaceful. Alice had known it was coming. Her mother had been slipping away for weeks, but nothing truly prepared her for that final moment. She sat beside Mary's bed at the palliative care center, holding her frail hand as the last breaths came. There were no words exchanged, only the soft sound of the wind through the open window and the gentle squeeze of her mother's fingers before they went still. It was over. The long, painful struggle that had defined Alice's life for so many months had come to an end. But with that end came an emptiness, a void that threatened to swallow her whole. The funeral was small, just close friends and family. Margaret, who had become more than just a mentor to Alice, stood by her side throughout the entire service, offering quiet strength. Claire, her ever-loyal friend, made sure Alice didn't have to handle any of the logistics alone. Lily clung to Alice's hand, her young face full of sadness and confusion as they said goodbye to the grandmother who had been a constant presence in her short life. Tom was there too, standing slightly apart from the others, but his steady presence was a comfort. After the burial, when the last of the mourners had gone, Tom approached Alice, his eyes full of quiet understanding. "You don't have to be strong today," he said softly, placing a hand on her shoulder. That was all it took. Alice, who had held it together for Lily's sake, for everyone's sake, finally let go. She collapsed into Tom's arms, sobbing quietly into his chest. He held her without saying a word, just letting her grief wash over her. The weeks after the funeral were a blur of work, caring for Lily and trying to adjust to a life without her mother. Alice threw herself into the marketing department, determined to prove herself after the success of her last project. Amanda had given her more responsibilities, and with that came a promotion. It was everything Alice had been working toward, but there was still a lingering emptiness that no amount of professional achievement could fill. One evening, after a particularly long day at the office, James invited Alice and a few colleagues out for dinner to celebrate the completion of another successful project. The small team gathered at a cozy restaurant, and as the wine flowed and the laughter grew louder, Alice found herself feeling lighter than she had in a long time. As the night wore on, Alice noticed Tom sitting across from her at the table, watching her with a quiet smile. There was something different between them now, something unspoken but unmistakable. Over the past few months, Tom had been a constant in her life, always there when she needed him, but never pushing her for more than she was ready to give. Their friendship had deepened, but something else had bloomed beneath the surface, something neither of them had dared to fully acknowledge. After dinner, as the group said their goodbyes and made their way home, Tom walked Alice to her car. The air between them was filled with unspoken words, and when they stopped beside her car, Alice turned to him, her heart pounding. "I don't know if I'm ready for anything serious yet," Alice said quietly, her voice trembling. "After everything that's happened, I'm still figuring out how to put myself back together." Tom smiled gently, his eyes soft with understanding. "I'm not asking for anything you're not ready for, Alice. I just want to be here for you, however you need." Alice looked up at him, her heart aching with gratitude and something else she couldn't quite name. I think I need you, Tom, but I'm scared." He stepped closer, taking her hand in his. "It's okay to be scared. We'll take it slow." And for the first time since David's death, Alice allowed herself to consider the possibility of love again. It wasn't the same love she had shared with David. This was different, gentler, like something new growing in the space where loss had once lived. As the weeks turned into months, Alice and Tom grew closer, and Lily began to warm to him as well. It was small things at first, Tom bringing Lily a toy bear one evening, and the way her eyes lit up when she held it close. Slowly, the bond between them grew, and Alice began to feel something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. In the midst of this newfound hope, Alice made another bold decision. She had been talking with Claire for months about opening their own cafe, a place that would be a haven for the community, somewhere warm and welcoming. It had been a dream they'd shared for years, but life had always gotten in the way. Now, with her new job giving her financial stability and Tom's quiet encouragement, Alice felt ready to take the leap. Claire, ever the optimist, was thrilled. The cafe opened quietly one bright morning, without fanfare, but word spread quickly. It wasn't long before the place became a local favorite, with customers drawn in not just by the coffee and food, but by the warmth of the place. The same warmth Alice had poured into it, along with all the love and care she had learned to give again. Margaret visited the cafe often, always sitting by the window with a gentle smile, watching Alice and Claire's hard work pay off. It was a reminder of how far Alice had come, from that struggling young widow to the woman she had become, a woman who had learned to let others in, to ask for help, and to rebuild her life from the ground up. One evening, not long after the cafe had opened, Tom took Alice and Lily out to the park. They walked together, hand in hand, watching Lily run ahead, laughing as she chased fireflies in the dusk. Tom pulled Alice aside, his eyes serious but filled with warmth. "I've been thinking," he said, reaching into his pocket. "I know you've been through a lot, and I know this has to be at your pace, but I don't want to wait any longer to tell you how much you mean to me." Alice's breath caught in her throat as Tom knelt in front of her, holding up a small ring. It wasn't flashy, just simple and elegant, exactly what she would have wanted. "Alice, I love you. I want to be here for you, for Lily, for whatever comes next. Will you marry me?" For a moment, the world stood still. All the memories, the grief, the fear, it all rushed through Alice at once. But standing there, in the soft glow of the evening light, with Lily laughing in the distance and Tom's steady, loving gaze, Alice felt something shift deep within her. "Yes," she whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, I will." Tom stood and pulled her into his arms, and in that moment, Alice knew that this was the start of a new chapter, one filled with love, hope, and the quiet strength that had carried her through the darkest times. Their wedding was small, just as Alice had always wanted. Lily stood proudly by her mother's side, holding the same toy bear Tom had given her months ago, and Margaret, Claire, and the other people who had become Alice's family watched with smiles full of love and pride. As Alice stood beside Tom, her heart full, she realized that the life she had thought she'd lost had been replaced by something even richer and more beautiful. The pain of the past would always be part of her story, but it didn't define her anymore. Alice had learned to let others in, to rebuild her life with the people who loved her, and to open herself up to the possibilities of the future. And as she looked into Tom's eyes and said her vows, she knew that she and Lily were no longer alone. They had found a new kind of family, one built not just on love, but on the strength to keep going, no matter what life threw at them. And that, Alice thought as she smiled through her tears, was more than she could have ever hoped for.